Welcome to all sorts of folks. Welcome to Ruth, and we'll say a little bit more about her in a moment. I can see a number of people on the screens. Unfortunately, I can only have 25 at a time on my screen, but I can see a number of faces I don't recognise in names. So really warm welcome, whether you're here in the village, whether you're further afield, whether you're abroad, whether you've just found yourself here, whether you're friends or whatever. You're really, really welcome this evening. Welcome to Johnny and the youth group in Crypt, the 14 to 18s. If you are 14 to 18, give us a wave. Are you there? Or have you all muted your screens as well? Thank you, Rob Kingdom. Gosh, you're looking very young on that. Well done. Really welcome to you guys as well. Thank you so much for being here. If you're here with your Connect group, our midweek adult Bible study and fellowship groups, that's great as well. What an encouragement to be here together. Welcome to you if you're really passionate about climate action. And welcome to you if you're perhaps a little bit skeptical about actually being able to do anything meaningful. This isn't a sort of an elite club for people who know all the answers at all. It's about coming to hear from someone who knows certainly far more than I do, and to help one another as we face these huge challenges. And there'll be welcome to those who I haven't mentioned, who aren't in any of the categories above. Just a couple of technical things to say. Certainly, as it says on my screen, the session will be recorded over this next hour or so. And Hugh Bourne, my clergy colleague who's running the tech side of things, says you may want to, during the talk, to turn off your screen. We don't think it will record. We think it will just record Ruth as she speaks. But I'm told that if the more screens that get turned off, the better the bandwidth and the clearer we'll see her, which is very exciting. So I'll leave that to your judgment in a moment, but we will ask everyone to mute, and I think actually Hugh has the power to do that anyway. The plan is for Ruth to speak for about 25 or 30 minutes, and then time for Q&A, and then we're going to finish at 9 o'clock. But Ruth's happy to stay on just for a few minutes afterwards if there's a particular question you'd like to ask her that perhaps hasn't got asked, or something else. She's okay to do that just for a few minutes, but I think she's been on Zoom for the best part of 12 hours already today, so we won't expect to stay around too long, Ruth. So thank you so much for that. So by way of introduction to Ruth, Ruth is an environmentalist, theologian, and social activist, and works for Tearfund with this wonderful job title, Global Advocacy and Influencing Director, which sounds slightly like you're in charge of the world, which is, I struggle to have any influence in my home, let alone globally. You've got a doctorate from King's College London, canon theologian at Rochester Cathedral, author of several books, including the Archbishop of Canterbury's 2020 Lent book, Saying Yes to Life, a regular contributor on Radio 4 and the BBC World Service. And now, to cap it all, you're here in Linfield, well, virtually. But above, you've got letters after your name and before your name, but I know that what you're really passionate about is helping people to get it and to live it, rather than just putting out lots of sort of theoretical things, actually to help us to understand things and how we can all play our part as we live in God's world. So I'm going to pray just briefly and then going to hand over to Ruth. So let me pray for us now. Father God, we thank you for the opportunity to be together virtually this evening. Thank you that so many people have tuned in and want to get involved. And pray, Lord, that you be in the midst of all that we do in this next hour. And we pray especially for Ruth, that you will be with her as she speaks, and help her words to be your words, and help us to know what we can do in the light of what we hear this evening. May it be an encouraging evening, an evening where we can see your hand at work. And Lord, above all, would you be glorified in all that we do? And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, Ruth.
Amen. Well, good evening. It's really lovely to see you all and to be with you. I would say don't all turn off your cameras, because then it's nice for me to see at least some people who I'm talking to this evening. So it's nice to see some friendly faces as well as blank screens, though we've kind of got used to this different way of operating, haven't we? But I am really sorry that we're not joining together in person, and I'm very sorry not to be, I was going to say here with you, there with you. I think we were working out before, it was 6 years ago that I last came and spoke at your church. Don't particularly expect you to remember, but I do have fond memories of you and of your beautiful church and lovely village and coming over. In fact, I think I may even have been a couple of times, I'm not sure. But it's great to be able to be with you this evening as well. And thank you all very much for taking this time out, I would say out of your busy schedules, but we're all in a place, some of us have busy schedules and others of us don't in this strange new world. But whatever your life is like at the moment, thank you for taking this time to join together with all of us, really to focus on what is such a hugely important topic today, thinking around the environmental challenge that we are facing, what its relevance is to us as Christians, as followers of Jesus, and then how we can get involved ourselves and how we can make some difference and how we can respond and take action. And I've called our talk this evening, I've called it Rising to the Challenge, because I think we really do have a huge challenge that we need to respond to. When we think about climate, when we think about the problems that our world is facing, this is a massive challenge, isn't it? I was speaking last week to the National Archdeacons Conference, and at a recent synod last year, the Church of England, you set the target of looking at, of putting into place a plan to look at how the Church of England can reach net zero by 2030. Even last year, 2030, felt quite a long way away. It sounds a little bit futuristic, doesn't it, 2030? But once you get into 2021, you realise that actually it's only nine years to go to meet the challenge of reaching net zero in your churches. This is going to come to you as well. You'll be hearing about this if you haven't already in your diocese. How do we reach that challenge? It is a massive challenge for us to rise to. And I want to look at these particular areas over our time together. I want to look at that this is a challenge that we have to rise to. I'm going to look at this is a challenge that as Christians we're called to rise to. Then I'm going to make the bold statement that it's a challenge we can rise to. And then finally, we'll have a look at how to rise to the challenge. So let's start off. It's a challenge that we have to rise to. Why do we have to rise to this challenge? Quite simply, for the sake of people and planet. As you know, I work for Tearfund, and at Tearfund we hear every day how the climate crisis is devastating the lives of people living in poverty. Tearfund actually has been working on issues of climate for around 30 years. And I can remember, I haven't been working for Tearfund at that length of time, but I've actually been supporting Tearfund for all of that length of time personally. And I can remember when Tearfund made the decision to start looking at climate issues. And I can remember getting through Tear Times and starting seeing some of those messages. And at that point, Tear Times had a letters page. And I can remember reading some of the responses from supporters really saying, but why are you focusing on climate? You're supposed to be looking at poverty. This isn't something that a poverty organisation ought to be looking at. Climate is an environmental issue. This isn't something for Tearfund, etc. And the reason, of course, why Tearfund began to look at climate was because we were starting to hear from our partners that the weather was changing. that it was getting hotter, that it was getting drier, that the rain patterns couldn't be relied on anymore. So the times when people would expect the rains and they would expect to plant the crops, those rains wouldn't come, but they would have to plant the crops anyway. And then when the rains did come, they would come in such a deluge that they would wash away all of the crops and people would lose what they had planted. And we know that our climate crisis is leading to more frequent droughts and floods, meaning that crops are ruined, people are going hungry, people are losing their homes and their jobs, children are missing out on education, and millions of people are being forcibly displaced by weather-related hazards. In fact, in 2016, for the first time in a decade, we saw world hunger increase, with climate change being one of those key drivers alongside conflict. And of course, we know that conflict itself is often climate driven. And I don't know how many of you have been watching The Perfect Planet. I imagine quite a good number of you here have been watching that. And on Sunday, it was the last one, looking at the impact of humans. And alongside the environmental things that Attenborough was talking about, I don't know if you noticed, I think maybe for one of the first times in his programs, he also looked at the impact of environmental breakdown on human beings. And he particularly looked at the millions of people being forcibly displaced and people losing their crops. And I just want to stop at this point really and say thank you, because I know as a church you have supported Tearfund and our work for many, many years. And thank you for doing that. And your work really does go to help support the work that we're doing, working with churches, helping lift people out of poverty. And when it comes to the climate crisis, we know that that is devastating the lives of people in poverty. So I think of someone like Jessie, who's a grandmother from Malawi, and she lost her husband, one of her sons, and her daughter-in-law to HIV. And in her village in Malawi, she lives close to a river, and her house is regularly ruined by flooding. And so they struggle constantly with hunger. And Jessie is one of many who we're helping through our work. And at the end, when I've finished talking, we're going to watch a little video that's going to look at Orbisa, a mother in the Afar region in northeast Ethiopia, again, just showing the impact that climate is having on people living in poverty. And then, of course, alongside people and people living in poverty is our wider planet. And the whole wider natural world, the wider environment, is facing a crisis. Our human activities are fundamentally altering the whole creation. There was a major intergovernmental report, I think not last year, because last year's a bit of a blur, so I think it must have been the year before, but possibly last year, I can't remember now, which found that 66% of marine ecosystems and 75% of land ecosystems have been changed because of us, with terrible consequences as ecosystems collapse and species are going extinct. And again, we know that the climate crisis is one of the drivers behind that. There are other reasons too, but the climate crisis is one of those reasons. And if any of you have been watching Perfect Planet, we have just been alongside all the wonder and the beauty of the wider natural world. We have also steadily through each programme been shown the impact that our actions are having on the wider natural world. And then of course, yesterday's final one really showed that in full force. So rising to the challenge, this is a challenge that we have to rise to for the sake of people and for the sake of the planet. And then secondly, this is a challenge actually for us as Christians, as followers of Jesus. This is a challenge that we are called to rise to. And I'm not going to take too much time this evening to give you, I could give you a full biblical theology of environmental care, and you're probably quite pleased that I haven't got the time, and I'm not going to do that. So there's a huge amount in the Bible that we could draw out that we could draw out around our responsibility and our calling to the wider natural world. But I just want to focus on the 4 points that I've put up here that are really simple, but for me are so fundamental when we think about our role in relation to the wider creation. This first point, because God made the world and he loves it. He loves his whole creation. Genesis 1:31 says that God looked at all that he had made and he said, "It is very good." I know a bit of New Testament Greek. I'm not brilliant with my Hebrew, so my very unacademic translation of that is that God looked at all that he had made and he said, "It is fantastic. I love it. Look at what I've made." Do you know, if you've made an amazing dish or you've done some craft or something that you're really proud of and you show those around you, you say, "Look at this, isn't this amazing?" And that's what God is doing. God looked at all that he had made and he said, "It is fantastic." In the Anglican tradition, we state this fundamental truth every Sunday, that we believe in God, the creator of the heavens and the earth. And I wonder whether we have really understood what it means to believe in a God who is creator. Too often, I think we miss that, we skip through that too quickly. God is creator. Many of us may be from a Christian tradition that has viewed the wider natural world with some suspicion. It's not really something we should be involved with. We've separated out the physical, the material, the earthy world from that which is non-physical, immaterial. We call that the spiritual world. We come from this Christian tradition that says that this spiritual world is superior to the physical material world, which is inferior. Well, there's nothing about that in the Bible. That owes everything to a Greek dualism that isn't a Hebrew biblical understanding of how God looks at this world. When we look at Genesis 1, we see that matter matters to God. He made this world. And in Colossians 1:15-20, we're told that this world was made for Jesus and by Jesus and through Jesus. This world was made for Jesus, almost as if this world is a present from the Father to the Son. This world is something that Jesus views so highly. It has incredible value because it is valuable to Jesus. And so, therefore, as people who love Jesus and follow him and want to worship him, don't we then want to hold with value that which is so valuable to him? If you think of when you've made something amazing and you show it to the people around you, if those you love just rubbished it and you'd made a dish and they knocked it out of your hand and chucked it in the bin or something, how would you feel? Well, they wouldn't do that, would they? Because they love you. And so if you've made something valuable, they would want to value what you love. And so that is the same for us too. God made this world and he loves his whole creation. I think if we can only get a deeper glimpse of that, then that is all we need in order to understand why we want to be responding to the crisis that we see around us. But of course, there is more than that as well. God has created us to look after the world. We've been made in God's image. in order to take care of the rest of what he has made. There's lots about the image of God that I would love to explore more with you, but now isn't the time. But there's so much in that little phrase as to what it means. But we've been made in God's image to look after the rest of what God has made. And if you are worried about this idea of domination, or we've been created to rule over, just take a moment to think about God's idea of rulership in the Old Testament. It's all about compassion, looking after the other, taking care of the widow and the stranger. It's all about responding to people who are living in poverty. Ultimately, it's about servanthood. And so our relationship with the wider natural world actually is one of servants. We are here not for it to serve us, but for us to serve the rest of what God has made. I find that very humbling and very challenging. And then we know that the world has gone wrong because of us. We only need to be watching Perfect Planet and Blue Planet 2 and all of those others, just to look around us to know that the world has gone wrong because of us. And the Bible too isn't shy of talking about that. And you see in the Bible a clear link between God, the people, and the wider natural world. And when the people are in a right relationship with God, you know that because they're practicing social justice and they're looking after other people. And when they do that, all goes well in the land. But then the reverse is the same too, and you see this in passages in Jeremiah and in Amos. When the people don't follow God, when they go away from God, they stop looking after other people. They sell the needy for a pair of sandals and practice dishonest trading standards and so on. And then all does not go well in the land. And Jeremiah talks about the land mourning because of the sin of the people, because they're not looking after other people. The land mourns, the land responds. So the world has gone wrong because of us. But then the good news is not just that we therefore have a responsibility to put it back to rights, but that we do that as part of God's plans for his creation. So again, there isn't the time to explore this fully. Actually, maybe I've got some next to me. Maybe a bit later I could just explain some of the books that I've written where you can really explore this in more depth. But some of us may be from a Christian tradition, again, that says our future is in heaven while this world is destroyed. And again, that isn't a view that we see in the scriptures. The idea of new that we have there, a new heavens and a new earth, is of renewal and transformation. God loves this world. He's not just going to throw it away as second rate. The views, the images that we get, those little glimpses that we get of the future, we don't really know what it's going to look like, but those little glimpses that we get in Isaiah, in Revelation 21 and 22, are very earthy. They're very heavenly and earthy. You have this heavenly city, but it's physical. It's got trees, it's got a river. It's just a beautiful combination of the kind of images we might have of a heaven reconciled back to earth. Renewal and transformation. God has a future for his creation. And therefore, as part of what it means to follow God, we play our part in working with him to see that renewal and to work towards it. There's a huge amount of theology and biblical exposition lying underneath some big things that I've been saying there that I know I don't have the opportunity really to explore fully. But those 4 points together, for me, build up a framework for why, as Christians, our climate crisis, our environmental crisis is a challenge that we are called to rise to. This is something for us as followers of Jesus to be involved with. And then thirdly, it's a challenge that we can rise to. I want you to look back over the last year and to think through how you responded to COVID. in your individual lives, as you got out, you helped your neighbours, you were involved in what was going on around you. You rose to the challenge, didn't you? Yes, yes, I know it probably laid you flat when it first happened for those first few months, but we picked ourselves up and we did respond to the challenge in our own lives, with our families, and with our church as well. And I know you, as a church, as All Saints, you responded. And I've been hearing just a little bit as to what you've been doing over this last year, and it sounds wonderful. And I want you to be encouraged. As a species, as human beings, we are amazing. You are amazing. We are resilient, we are creative, we are tenacious, and we're not on our own. Together, we can rise to this challenge. COVID has shown us that when we face a perceived emergency, when we see that need, we can take action and we can respond. When people really understand the emergency, yes, there are huge changes that we need to make. And whoever would have thought we could make the changes and pivot in the way that we have done over the last year? But we have. We can change. And this gives me hope that this is a challenge that we can rise to. So then finally, how can we rise to the challenge? And I've just put up a few images. I'm sure there's well, I know there's lots else that we can talk about as well, but just some things to get us started in our thinking. First image there is Eco Church, which, and I'm sorry, I can't remember now whether as a church you've got involved with Eco Church and are working with that or not. And so you may well be already on your Eco Church journey, I don't know. But Eco Church is the best place to start as a church. It was launched 5 years ago. Last week was its 5th anniversary, and over 3,000 churches are now involved. 3/4 of Church of England dioceses are involved. Many of the Methodists, all of the Welsh dioceses are involved. Many of the Methodists, synods and councils and what dioceses and whatever they have are involved too, and other churches across different denominations and networks. And it's so encouraging seeing how Eco Church has helped the church in the UK to respond. And I won't give you all of the details here, but it's a really simple thing that you can get involved with as a church, and that will help you that will help you with the action that you will want to take. And then secondly, this climate emergency toolkit was just launched last week. And this is something that Tearfund and Christian Aid and CAFOD and A Rocha and a whole range of other organisations have got together to provide this resource for you in your churches this year. So I'm sure you know that this year is a crucial year, with the UN climate change talks coming up at the end of the year that would have happened last year but have been pushed back a year, and then G7, which we're hosting in June. And the focus is going to be on COVID and on climate. And we have a massive opportunity heading up to these UN climate talks at the end of the year to make a big difference. And as churches, we really need to be involved and engaged. And so the Climate Emergency Toolkit is something I recommend that you have a look at as a way of getting involved in this lead up to COP26. And then there's lots of things that we can do in our own lives. And I've put up some examples there. Sometimes when we think about the changes to make in our lives, it can all feel overwhelming. So I tend to boil it down to these 4 areas that you can see on your screen of food, travel, energy, and waste, and plastic in particular. So thinking about how we eat, where our food comes from, the changes that we can make there. Thinking about travel, I've put there an electric car, but there's many other things to think about as well, particularly our flying. And I know, of course, that our flying has stopped over the course of the year. And can we take that as an opportunity to press the reset button? Could we decide now that actually we've survived without flying for a year? And now maybe we might be able to make a decision that we're not going to fly on holiday in the same way that maybe we've become accustomed to. So we can change our travel habits. Solar panels, just an illustration of the whole area of energy. And one of the best things that you can do here, one of the simplest things, is to switch your energy supply to a renewable energy supplier, such as Octopus or Good Energy or Ecotricity are 3 examples. And then finally thinking about our waste, not our physical waste, but our waste in terms of the things that we throw away. How much do we throw away? Our recycling, and particularly plastic, which we know is such a big issue for our society today. And that was really gaining momentum, wasn't it, in our consciousness before the pandemic, which has sadly taken so much of that away. But we mustn't lose sight of the disaster that our high plastic usage is in this society and in our oceans and for people living in poverty. So there are many different things that we can do to rise to the challenge, both in our churches and as individuals. But I just want to finish by saying that I don't think we can tackle the climate crisis unless we see faith groups engaged. Globally, around 80% of the population adheres to one of the 5 major faiths, and about a third of the global population adheres to the Christian faith. And so one of the things that I'm constantly calling on, and I've been speaking into the national media around this quite a bit recently, is that if we are going to tackle the climate crisis, we cannot ignore faith, the role of faith in helping people to do that. And that means all of us in our churches, in our individual lives, rising to this challenge that the climate crisis has laid before us. We're going to move from this to watch a very short video that we've put together as Tearfund, looking at climate and leading up to COP at the end of this year. And it's something that you could show more on a Sunday in your church, in your small groups, that I hope might be a helpful way to raise awareness around these issues.
For me, addressing climate change is, how are we going to protect the most vulnerable? We have the moral responsibility to do everything to put us on track to a maximum temperature of 1.5.
Life is very challenging here. It hasn't rained for 6 months, and I don't know when it will rain next.
For many people around the world, the impact of climate change is devastating. In the north of Ethiopia, they used to expect rain up to 4 months a year, but now it rarely comes. People don't have enough water to survive.
We have no food and are dependent on our livestock for our livelihood. Whenever there is no rainfall, our animals die as there is no grass or water. When it rains, I only need to walk 5 minutes to collect water, but these water sources are now dry. Every night, I walk for 10 hours to collect water from a lake. The length of the dry season is increasing. I worry about my children and my family. I feel worried whenever I think about the future.
We are on course for global temperature rises that will put millions of lives at risk as extreme weather events such as droughts become more frequent, and it's the poorest who are hit the hardest. But we are at a turning point. Decisions are being made now about how we build back from coronavirus that will shape our economy, society, and climate for decades to come. As Christians, we have a vital role as we pray, speak out for change, and love our neighbours across the world through how we live. You can help turn the tide on climate change and build a better world for us all including people like Orbisa.
We have a huge potential that has not been unleashed yet. We are facing a world that is forever changed, but that we have the capacity to build much better living conditions for our children, and their children, if we only set our mind to it.
Together, let's call on the UK government to lead the world towards a greener, fairer future. Add your voice to our petition today. Now is the time to unite in prayer and action to see a breakthrough in the climate crisis.
Stuart, I think I'll hand over to you.
Great, Ruth, thank you so much. You've packed in loads there in just a short time, and we really appreciate all you've put into that and how clearly that was laid out. We asked folks in the last 2 or 3 weeks to email some questions in. I've got some questions here. I make it about 8:38, so we've probably got about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So I've got a few here. You've addressed some of the things, but we'll pick up some others from within that. If you have a particular question you'd love to ask, perhaps if you could, as we go through, maybe to raise a hand. If you're on a laptop or a computer, there's a button that says reactions down at the bottom, and there's a button there that says raise hand. So if I press mine there, it keeps a hand up rather than it just going up for a few seconds. It will stay up until you take it down. So if you've got a particular question you'd like to ask, please do that. We'll try and get around some questions if we can, but obviously we have a limited amount of time. Just briefly, before we go into questions, it seems a slightly strange time to be saying this. If we were meeting in person, we would have had a retiring offering for Tear Fund, and we made that available online tonight if you want to. So just to say that at the end of this, Hugh will put up in the chat function at the bottom a little link that will take you if you do want to make a contribution to Tear Fund. There it is there. So if you need to go and get credit card numbers or whatever, rather than you get to the end and suddenly it's gone. So if you'd like to do that, sorry, that's a little bit of an intrusion now. I meant to mention it earlier, but we'll do that towards the end. So Ruth, lots of stuff there, some really helpful stuff. Can I kick off with a question that says, as Christians, we recognize that creation is in a mess because of sin. Shouldn't all our efforts go into carrying out the Great Commission of making disciples of all nations? Isn't church involvement in caring for the environment distracting us from this?
Thank you. Well, I hope after hearing my the little points I brought out from the scriptures just now, you won't still think that. And for me, a full understanding of the gospel, or for me, this comes down to a full understanding of what the gospel is, the gospel being, you know, literally the good news of Jesus. And I try and keep this short. I see my understanding of the gospel is through a relationship lens. So I see that we were created to be in relationship with God, with other people, with the wider natural world, and also with ourselves. And the fall broke those fundamental 3 aspects of relationship with God, other people, and the wider natural world. The fall broke those relationships. And then really the rest of the Bible is the story of God working to put those relationships back to rights. Firstly, through the calling of his people, Israel, and then when they failed in their calling, then through the incarnation of the Son, Jesus Christ, who came in order to reconcile people to him. Yes, absolutely, that is the core of our Christian faith. But actually, if we stop there, then we have missed so much else that the gospel is about. And Jesus came also in order to restore our relationship with other people, Ephesians 2, Galatians 3:28, and then in the ways that I've been explaining, to restore our relationship with the whole natural world. So a full understanding of the good news of Jesus Christ means that our faith is rooted in developing our relationship with God, and then coming out from that, our relationship with other people and our relationship with the wider natural world. And my understanding of discipleship is all encompassing. Discipleship means learning, doesn't it? Learning and following Jesus. And I follow a Jesus who is the Lord of all creation. So I think when we get into arguments about what's more important, is it evangelism or social action? Is it a life of prayer or a life of activity or whatever? I think all of those arguments simply come from a false understanding of what the good news of Jesus is about. And actually following Jesus and his good news is about all these different things together. So let's not fight and argue over which is more important. They are all part of a full relationship with our redeeming, saving, creating God.
Yes, it's a both and rather than either or.
Yeah.
And someone once said it's not that the Great Commission doesn't wipe out the Great Commandment.
Yeah.
Jesus, love God, love one another. And lots of this was about neighbour love. I was very struck in the video. It said, how are we going to protect the most vulnerable? And we can see nowhere more clearly than in the last year that actually we are globally connected. Something that probably started in the back end of China somewhere is now causing us to be interacting in this way. We are so connected. So actually neighbour love, who is my neighbour, suddenly takes on a very a real thing from around the world.
The pandemic is an environmental crisis. And it's a crisis that has the environment at its heart, because we think it has come about because we haven't been taking care of the wider natural world. So the pandemic isn't a natural disaster like an earthquake. The pandemic is a disaster of our own making because of deforestation, because of animal poaching, because of illegal wildlife trade and so on. It's because we've been abusing the natural world that this pandemic has arisen. So it's another example of how environment, human issues, they're all so interconnected and you can't separate them.
Okay, another question here is, it sounds a bit defeatist, but what's the point of me doing my little bit when restoring the environment is such a huge problem involving competing interests of nation states and multinational corporations, as well as the world population of billions of people? In short, what difference can little old me make?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really get that. And it's something that I wrestle with and struggle with all the time. What's the point of me doing anything that I try to do? But I do see that there's a point for a variety of reasons. One, because actually lots of little voices together and lots of little actions do add up, and they do make a difference when you have a movement of people. And history is littered with examples of social movements that have been about individuals deciding to take action, and then it has grown into a movement which has brought about large scale change. Or you look at a mosaic. Each individual little piece isn't going to make a difference, but you put them all together and you have something quite stunning. So when we act together, we can make a difference. It also makes a difference because every act we do is a political act. If you like to think you're not political, I'm afraid that's not the case. Everything we do is political. It's sending a signal in one way or another to our governments, to businesses, about the things that are important to you. And government will change and businesses will change when they see that their citizens and their consumers want that to happen. But for me, the fundamental reason actually isn't about bringing about change. It's simply the question, how do I want to live as a follower of Jesus? As a follower of the Lord of all creation, how do I live in a way that respects and takes care of what is so valuable to him? So that, to me, is the fundamental point there.
It's really helpful, isn't it, to think, who do we follow and what sort of things what's his heart for? Therefore, what should our heart be for? It's quite a different thing to where do I need to sort my rubbish or whatever.
Yeah.
That's sort of the other end of things. But in terms of focusing down on church, how do we do that question of how can we get our church community to engage more fully with this when is sort of thinking, well, I don't live in the church building, we live in our homes, but we're part of that. Can you explain or share a little bit about that, how we can do this as either All Saints Church here, or if there's others from other churches?
Yeah, well, you're doing it brilliantly by putting on this kind of an evening and raising the discussion and the awareness and the understanding and getting the conversation going. And then there are all sorts of things that we can do in our churches. So if I take the Eco Church model, that looks at 5 areas of church life. It looks at worship and teaching, at how a church looks after its buildings and its land. And then it looks at the global and community engagement as a church. And then finally, the lifestyle of its church members. So each of those areas gives different things that you can be doing as a church. There are so many different examples in your teaching, in your understanding. You can be putting on this kind of event. You can be ensuring that your sermons, that the sorts of things you teach about, you don't necessarily have to have a Creation Care Sunday, just that this kind of understanding is woven in through the teaching series. Think about your prayers at church. My eldest daughter went for a while to an Anglican church with some of her school friends. And, as if can't remember how much you follow the liturgy and All Saints, but when you do the prayers and you go through and you pray for the Queen and for the Bishop and and then you pray for the world. And I can remember my daughter coming back one Sunday really frustrated, saying, "Mum, every week they pray for the world. Every week they say they're going to pray for the world, but they don't. They pray for people in poverty, they pray for refugees, they pray for wars. They don't actually pray for the world." And I thought, yes, you've just seen it. We talk about the world and we jump to humans and we miss the world. So finding ways to incorporate the wider natural world into your prayers. When you are able to meet, think about a meal that you might do together. Could you go default veg? So that you basically it's a meat-free meal. And if for medical reasons you need to eat meat, well, then that's fine. You can have that as an option, but it's default veg. Thinking of your energy supplier, ensuring you get your energy from a green energy supplier. There are so many different things that we can do.
Great. Just one more question before, if there's others who may want to ask one in the here and now. What particular outcomes is Tearfund hoping for from the COP26, and how can we pray for this conference particularly?
What we really need to see there, so this COP26 is building on the Paris Climate Agreement that would have been 5 years ago, it's now going to be 6. And at the Paris Agreement, as you'll know, nearly all countries of the world came together and pledged to reduce their emissions, to keep warming to below 2 degrees, ideally below 1.5, but below 2 degrees. And they agreed that they would come together again 5 years later and bring their country plans as to how they're going to, in their countries, keep their emissions down at that level. So Glasgow is when all of the countries are bringing their plans to put out on the table and to commit to. Currently, the plans, if you put those plans together, they add up to way above 2 degrees. I think it's something like 3.2, but I might have got that figure wrong. So we really need to see the country plans adding up to ideally 1.5, but certainly below 2 degrees. And we need to see our government taking a real lead on that. The government has been making some good steps. So just before Christmas, they announced 68% reduction in emissions from 1990 levels by 2030. Sorry, that's a lot of numbers. And they pledged to stop funding overseas fossil fuel projects, which actually is something at Tearfund that we've been leading on some campaigning with. So that was a huge win for us. So the government are taking some good steps, but we need them to be stronger and bolder. So pray for those, they're called NDCs, nationally determined contributions, that all countries are working on, that they will be adequate and will give us the reductions that are needed.
Thank you. That's really helpfully specific on that. I just wonder if we can broaden out now. I've got another few minutes. Does anybody, particularly from the floor, as we might say, want to ask a question? I'm afraid I can only see 25 screens at a time. So I'm just going to scan through and see for any hands that may be up. Gosh, there's a lot of blank screens as well, or not on there. Let's have a look. I can see Peter Gorman. Could you unmute yourself, Peter? Because that will be a big help for all concerned.
Well, thank you very much. That was very challenging. But I wonder if you could just say something, just a few words, possibly about the implications of global heating for migration, and in particular, perhaps what our attitude as Christians should be to immigrants and refugees and that sort of area.
Yeah, thank you. We again have a huge challenge on our hands when it comes to migration, and for years now, one of the sobering things for me, I've been speaking on climate issues about 25 years now, is that so much of what I used to speak about in terms of predictions is becoming reality. So we've been predicting millions of environmental refugees, and now we are starting to see that. And you look at some of the crises, the large refugee problems that we've been seeing coming from Syria and elsewhere. And yes, they are conflict driven, but when you look behind the conflict, I don't want to be overly simplistic, but one of the drivers alongside the conflict, or one of the causes of the conflict, has been climate, and often drought is behind that. So we are already seeing mass migration, and Perfect Planet on Sunday night showed some of that. As to what our attitude should be, I'm not going to get political here, and I'm not going to tell you what view you ought to take, except that the scriptural view is one of hospitality and generosity, and taking care of the stranger, and taking care of the widow, taking care of the orphan. How that works out practically in terms of diplomacy, and what the very practical things are in terms of the right thing to do with that, of course is extremely complicated, and I'm not going to get into that here. But the attitude is very clear in scripture as to how we should be approaching and welcoming the refugee and the stranger who is in our midst. And earlier this year, last year, we held a global forum as Tear Fund on issues of migration and refugees, and we had to hold it online, of course, and brought together experts from around the world. And I sat in on some of those sessions and just found it so challenging and humbling, and realizing how much we have to learn from migrants and from refugees. I always came at it from the perspective of how much I had to give, but actually some of the things I was hearing were around how much I had to receive and to learn from people who have been through such horrendous situations. So it's a challenge. It's one that we are facing and will increasingly face. We also have to recognise that we will not face it to the same degree as other countries in other parts of the world, who will be the countries that will bear the brunt of the climate crisis. Of the migrant crisis.
Great, thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Anybody else? You may want to raise a hand by pressing the reaction button, and even if you haven't got your face on the screen, I should be able to see that. So I'll just have a quick scan through, and if there's anybody who'd like to ask a question, as long as we can hear your voice, we don't even have to see your face.
Have I stunned you all into silence, into submission?
I can't find the button. Can I ask a question?
Mark Lee, yes. Mark, thank you for piping up there.
So very recent, I think today, and I only glanced at it en passant, as it was, but the conversation about growth being measured on GDP and not taking into account climate or other countries even, and the impact, the global impact of local decisions. How, I don't want to get into a sort of political economic argument, but can you talk a little bit about the Christian attitude or the implications for the Christian attitude of that kind of argument, a raw economic argument on a faith perspective? Is that possible?
Yes. So I'm not sure that I've quite got to the nub of what you're asking.
So if we just measure success, growth, the way the economy works, the fact that we have a little bit of inflation so that pensions grow and it fuels a positive economy, and when you know, we lose jobs, economy contracts, everything goes badly, government can't fund things, we don't have enough money to pay for basic services, everything gets measured very locally within the country effectively. And so decisions made about, for example, how to, you know, whether to build airports or motorways, which have an environmental impact hugely, which then affects global, the global natural world and other countries in their you know, flood problems, their drought problems as a result. And that's not measured, that's not taken into account, it's completely ignored.
Yeah.
So effectively the decisions are only half decisions and they're very selfish decisions.
Yeah, thank you. And we are increasingly seeing how flawed GDP is as a measure of growth. We haven't yet found another one that that's fully agreed on. There are other measures that are proposed around the place, but GDP still continues to be the default. But we realise that it is flawed, but exactly for your reasons. So if there's a...
So it seems an opportunity for a faith perspective to have a genuine, constructive contribution to that thinking, that debate, which could have profound implications.
I think the pandemic has highlighted to us again just how important the economy is. And there's nothing in the Christian faith that would speak against that. So the economy is very important, but it's also highlighted how intricately linked to society and to the wider natural world the economy is, when we've tended to try to keep it separate. And I think we have resources in the Christian faith to help people think through a positive approach to money and possessions, and a positive understanding of wealth that isn't a world-denying misery, poverty thing, but also isn't about endless growth and about constantly striving for more. And Christian values around contentment and gratitude, thinking of the other, taking care of the wider natural world. I think all of those are values that can come into play in a conversation around the role of the economy in society. From a non-Christian perspective, you may well have listened to them already. I'd really recommend Mark Carney's Wreath lectures that were delivered just before Christmas. He looked at COVID credit and climate, and they were excellent. I'd really recommend those. But I do think we have things to offer value-wise as Christians as well.
Great, thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Mark, as well for that. Thinking in particular about the hidden aspects of some of this as well. So,
Stuart, can I pick up on some of my books, because some of these things I've written about.
You beat me to my last question, which is where can we read more? I was just about to plug your on your. Is it looking on your blog, ruthvalerio.net? Is that the best
Very
place?
kind. Yes. If you look at ruthvalerio.net, you can see the publications there. But a few. Can I just do a shameful plug?
Be shameless about it, I think.
Shameless.
Shameless plug, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So L is for Lifestyle. A new edition came out last year, and this is a really practical, not last year, the year before now, and this is a really practical look at how we can live well in God's world, and just lots of practical ideas there, looking at all of the major issues that we face, and then really practical stuff that we can do. If you want to delve more into the biblical side, as well as look at the practical and get an idea for how the global church is responding, Saying Yes to Life was the Archbishop of Canterbury's Lent book last year, and it's an exploration of Genesis 1, of the creation narrative, but then pulls all sorts of other things from that. It's Justin Welby said to me he wanted it to be theologically rooted and global in scope. So there you go. That's what it is. But it's an exploration of the creation narrative in Genesis 1. Then this is a really small little booklet from the Grove Books series that you're probably familiar with, called COVID-19: Environment, Justice and the Future, and looks exactly at that. I co-wrote it with a scientist who explores the origins of COVID-19 and another theologian, a church leader, a vicar from Oxford. So that's COVID-19, Environment, Justice and the Future. And then finally, Just Living, Faith and Community in an Age of Consumerism, looks deeply at how can we live well as Christians in our consumer society. And the beginning of the book actually starts with that relationship foundation, that holistic understanding of the gospel. So if you want to read a bit more about that and get your head around that a bit more, then you'll find that in there, in here. And there's also a chapter around a Christian approach to money and possessions, which is what made me think of that. So you can read more around globalization and consumerism and those sorts of issues in here. So, thank you.
Excellent. Good shameless plugging there. I like that.
Thank you.
That was very well done. So, Ruth, thank you so much for, I was going to say being with us. You haven't actually left your kitchen, which has kind of helped. You talked about eco-transport. That's about as eco as it gets in not having to leave your home. But thank you so much for being here, for being with us. And thank you to there's a little group that was set up at All Saints called Care for God's Creation. I'm just looking on my screen to see if Sarah Newnham could give us a little wave. Sarah, do you want to unplug and give a 30-second shameless plug for the group? She's putting you on the spot.
Yeah, sure. So we have a group at Church of Committees. A number of us are on the steering committee, called Caring for God's Creation. And it is looking very much at how we as a church can help people to understand these issues a bit more and Christian perspectives on them, and also what we can do within the church. So whether that's the church grounds, the church building, we have started, we're on a very early days of the eco church process with Arosha. We've just done the church survey. So we sort of take time to look at that and really help people to look at how we can support them to be more eco-friendly and do what they can for creation, really, and understand it. So yeah, and activism as well. We're trying to look at how we can encourage a bit more activism as well. For
great, thank you. Many of us will know Sarah, and do get in contact if you'd like to know a little bit more about that or have some ideas or contribution to make there. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, particularly if you're not from All Saints. You've been really welcome here. I hope it's been helpful. I hope the tech has worked. Thank you to the young people for coming in as well. Hopefully you've all managed to stay in and to get involved where you can. I was very struck as I emailed Ruth earlier today, and at the bottom of her email it says, every email, it says many steps in the right direction. Many little steps in the right direction. Sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, Ruth. And actually, if we all go away and think, what's one or two little steps that we might make in the right direction, then it all helps, rather than to think, gosh, it's a global problem, what can I do? Actually, many little steps in the right direction, and saying, actually, Lord, give me a heart for the things that you have a heart for. And we've, as we've said, God made and loves the world. Jesus died for the world. Not just for sinful people, so that we actually think of in a more global way. So think about what you might be able to do in response to this. And if you want to look at Ruth's blog, it's ruthvalerio.net. But let me just say a short prayer to close. And then if you'd like to stay on, Ruth just got a few minutes, and you can just stay on. If not, then have a good night. Father, thank you so much for a chance to think, albeit briefly and virtually, tonight about what is a global issue. And Father, help us to see things through your eyes, to see things biblically, to see things as the Lord Jesus would see them. Give us a heart like yours. And Lord, help us to think how that the way that we live in your world, how that shows that we love you and love our neighbour, whether our neighbour is next door or on the other side of the world. And particularly as we see throughout the scriptures, your heart for the poor. And pray, Lord, that we would have a heart for the poor too. And give us wisdom, give us courage as to know how to respond as individuals, as families, as a church family, and as part of this nation, Lord. So thank you for this time. May it be really a start of something or continuation of something as we seek your will in these matters. Thank you again for Ruth for being here and for all of us being together tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.